All right, everybody, let's do this. I am Drew McManus, the author of Adaptistration, and this is my podcast, Shop Talk, where I invite captivating guests to talk about engaging topics connected to the orchestra business. Today's engaging topic is going to be focusing on musician injuries and talking about this in a context that the field really has never encountered before, which is this long stretch of time after COVID. Where musicians, no matter how long they've actually been practicing, no matter how much work they put into maintaining themselves, it's just not something that you can just switch gears immediately from, moving from that environment of being off for the year and getting into actual performances. And today we're going to talk to two artistic decision makers. We've got a music director and an artistic administrator. And these are the people who are going to be at the forefront of figuring out exactly what orchestras are going to be playing. And what they're playing, the repertoire or programming, is going to impact that potential stress and injury threshold for musicians. So first, let's introduce our two guests today. First up, we have Jennifer Arnold. Jennifer is the Director of Artistic Planning and Operations for the Richmond Symphony Orchestra, but got her start as a violist, where she served for 15 years in the Oregon Symphony viola section. She cut her teeth with 5+ years on the Musicians Orchestra Committee, where she participated in 3 collective bargaining agreement negotiations. But the highlight of her committee duties included 6 seasons on a very active orchestral artistic advisory committee, all of which led Jennifer to fall in love with every aspect of creative programming. From there, she decided to spend the next decade highlighting BIPOC composers and artists whose music is often left out of the classical canon. Who would have thought that being on the orchestra committee would be the gateway drug to move into management? But you found out how to do that, Jen. And hello.
Hi. I love it. So, yeah.
Next up, from the music director side of things, we have Tito Muñoz. Internationally recognized as one of the most gifted conductors on the podium today, Tito is now in his 7th season as music director of the Phoenix Symphony, where he champions the composers of our time. A passionate educator, Tito regularly visits North America's leading conservatories, universities, summer music festivals, and youth orchestras. He also enjoys a regular partnership with Arizona State University, where he has held a faculty position and is a frequent guest teacher and conductor. Hello, Tito.
Nice to see you, Drew.
Good to see both of you here today. Well, let's jump right into this. I mean, I'm starting off with a premise where I'm taking a position as a fact, but let me run that through both of your filters first. Do you think this actually is an issue of concern for musicians, or is it more much ado about nothing?
Yes, it is definitely an issue of concern. I think probably more so for orchestras that are not playing. We've been playing regularly here in Richmond, so
Define regularly.
regularly like at least once a month concerts
Okay.
with orchestra, and then small chamber groups, other activities, things like that. So we haven't really paused our season. Not really. We haven't paused our season at all. We've just slimmed down our season. So I've been really lucky in the sense that the musicians have been, I will say our core musicians have been playing the majority of the time. The first service musician that we just can't fit on stage, unfortunately, I think have been off a little more or doing other things chamber music wise and smaller. So that is a real concern.
Yeah, for us in Phoenix, I'm sorry to interrupt, but for us in Phoenix, it's been the opposite. You know, we have not been playing, so we're coming from that from a really cold, completely cold standpoint. So it's going to be a very, very big, important point that we're going to have to address. You know, while the season will begin in September, October, November.
And that's an interesting juxtaposition because let's give, I think, folks actually listening to this a little bit of context, especially if they're not familiar enough or an insider to know the difference in budget sizes between the two groups. Jen, what's the season length and budget for Richmond right now?
So we are 38 weeks, $6 million budget.
Okay, and you mentioned core and per service, so which indicates that's going to be a hybrid situation where a smaller group of musicians are going to be employed as salaried musicians, and the rest are paid on that per service when they're actually used for the rehearsal and or the performance. And Tito, on your end, what's Phoenix's structure?
Yeah, so we're normally a 38-week orchestra as well. Our budget is a little larger. It's between 10 and $13 million, depending on the year. And we have a full complement of 66 full-time musicians.
So everyone there is salaried.
Right. We do, of course, expand for different things because we have threes in the winds, for example, so we do larger works. We do, of course, hire substitutes or extras. But generally speaking, we have a full complement, full-time salaried.
Excellent. So that context makes your responses actually even more interesting in the juxtaposition. The smaller budget organization has actually been doing more work than the larger budget organization. And granted, you're both in very different locations in the country, and that's going to impact what you are and aren't able to do through local restrictions as well. But Jen, it sounds like in Richmond, there at least haven't been local restrictions in place to prevent what sounds like basically the one concert per month pattern that you've been in.
Right. Here in Virginia, we've been really lucky because our governor is, I think he's former medical professional. So he really surrounds himself with people who follow the data. And they've been pretty strict, but not as strict as, like a New York or the West Coast the West Coast states, things like that. So they monitor the data, but they're also Southern, right? So there's that line. It's a purple, basically, state. So we're not going to close everything down, but we're going to monitor it. So I think, in a way, that it's been a really smart way of doing it. I will say that.
Oh, good. And that's probably as political as we're going to get on this conversation right now. Because those decisions are beyond all of our control.
Exactly.
Correct.
But we do have to deal with them. Now, to that end, though, I do want to dive in a little bit more with the budget size angle with all of this, because you do have groups that are like the 52-week, living wage salary organizations, the larger budget groups. Some of those are somewhat active, and some of them are doing absolutely nothing as well, too. Those musicians also, compared to something like a per-service orchestra, have, if nothing else, more of a regular workload that's consistent for them from week to week to week to week. And going from that to doing absolutely nothing to going back to playing everything that they're used to doing and had been conditioned for physically is really more of what we're going to be talking about, and what orchestras within those different budget tiers really need to be thinking about moving forward. And Jen, since you come from, or you went into management coming out of the performer side of this, I mean, you have the education, the experience, and what it is to actually be a performer and the demands that it takes on your body. Walk us through just a little bit of what you think concerns along these lines could potentially be for musicians.
Well, I think there's so many. I think one of the things is that who has been playing and who hasn't, right? That's the first concern, making sure people realize that we give the planning department, artistic department, gives enough information to realize, that we're going to start in September or October or November, so that they can plan like far enough when to restart, right? Mm-hmm. I took a sabbatical from the Oregon Symphony. Actually, I think I took two, but I took one, and I did not play for almost a year.
Oh, wow.
Well, I took a sabbatical, so I've done this already.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I had to plan out my summer before I came back to the Oregon Symphony to make sure I was in shape. And so that, I called the osteopath and got my appointments back. And and I started small with small gigs. I think one of the issues is there aren't that many small gigs right now for musicians to actually play. So I think they're going to have to create their own opportunities to play, whether that's outdoors or whatever environment they are, or just reading at home, or starting, I know a lot of people are starting to pick up solo work and relearn music again that they haven't played in 20 years, 30 years to keep in shape. So I think one of the parts of it is knowing when we're going back. What orchestras need to start telling people, like, we are planning for September, we are planning for October, and making sure the communication is clear so that if someone wants to start practicing in July who hasn't been playing for a year, I mean, it's going to be 18 months, right, between when this started and when the fall starts. That's a long time.
Absolutely, and assuming musicians even have, enough motivation to continue to play throughout that stretch of time. Even with the advance warning, it's still building back up into that process. I'm curious to know, in your own experience with the year off, was there anything you learned from a retrospective mindset? Is there anything you wish you had done differently to better prepare to get back into things, or did it all seem to fall into place?
It fell into place better than I thought, I would say.
Okay.
I actually thought I would be in worse shape of not after playing. And when I say that, I don't mean like physically. I just meant actually like intonation wise, the technique of the instrument. I was like, oh man, I actually thought when I started in the summer, I was like, I'm going to be a little behind, but it actually came back like that. I was really surprised by that. That said, you have to, get back in shape and things like that, and posture really.
As we all sit up straighter, yes.
I know. Over, bring that core back and stuff. But I think there's other things, getting back into the normal work routine that you just have to, get back into.
Well, good. Well, Tito, I'm gonna throw out a couple of things to toss this over to you, but I'm gonna throw out a few ideas for what I am sure is going to be going through some listeners' minds right now. Jen was a professional musician who had an orchestra job. Music directors don't usually go from the performer to conductor route. So there's likely going to be, especially musicians listening to this perhaps, thinking, well, my conductor has never really had to do this before. So do they even have the capacity to truly understand what it is that as a musician we really need when making these artistic planning decisions that we're probably not part of right now?
Right. Well, they should. I mean, music directors need to have that empathy. I luckily did have a small professional violin career before I moved into the conducting full time, and it was a freelance career, so it was quite active and busy and varied. But I never took that amount of time off the way Jen did, from actively playing, time off, then coming back actively playing. The most important thing that I think for music directors and just for orchestras in general is that they just listen to the musicians. They listen to the players, and having a person like Jen, who has enormous experience as a player, also is very helpful, because that really bridges the gap between the administration and the musicians, and it builds trust. But just having that opportunity to speak to musicians on a regular basis in Phoenix, which is very similar to other orchestras, we do have an artistic committee, an advisory committee made up of musicians that is always in the loop as far as the calendar is concerned, the programming is concerned. And so they're able to say, look, these, in normal situations, these 3 weeks are heavy. We need to fix this. We need to adjust the program on this. It's a movie, then a really heavy Masterworks concert, and then something else afterwards. And it's like, let's figure something else out to make it work. So going into next season, and for us, it will be 18 months without activity for most of the orchestra. Some are doing things on their own. Some of the musicians are putting together their own projects and doing some volunteer work. But no, I mean, wind players especially, that they're going to have not played together for a long time, because there's a lot of concern with aerosols and all of those things, COVID-wise. So how do we come back, and how do we come back in a way that's going to mitigate some of these things? And I think that's going to be a huge thing that music directors and artistic planners are going to have to do, because, as you say, it's very unusual to have somebody like Jen who has 15 years of playing experience. That just doesn't happen. Same thing for music directors. And so listening to the musicians is going to be key.
Well, let's dovetail that. I think that's a perfect place to move into more of the ground level view on this, which is, Tito, let's start with you. How are you planning to address all this? It's clear that you've put some thought into it. And, Phoenix, do you guys actually have at least a target, back on stage date yet?
We do. It's still, we're still discussing it, and nothing's public yet, but yes, we do have it. We do have a target area of the year where we're going to bring everybody back. And so, yes, I mean, this thing is constantly swirling in my mind because not only for the physicality, but also for just the artistic. I mean, when you haven't played together, you have to relearn how to listen. You have to relearn how to all of those things that, yes, in some ways, as Jen said, it's like riding a bike, they will come back, but we need the time because normally speaking, we're forced back for the first week. It's just wham, bam, bam, bam. We got to do our rehearsals and then do the show. And it's as if we haven't had any of that time. So the musicians do have to take it upon themselves if they haven't been playing during the summer, which a lot of them do, or would in normal situations with their summer festivals. They'd come back and they'd be conditioned to do that. That's not the case this year. You know, a lot of the summer festivals will not be playing either, and so that work that a lot of our musicians would have had is not going to exist. So it really is going to be cold a start. So one of the ways we're thinking about doing in Phoenix, and this is something that we've already spoken about outwardly to our patrons, is starting out with a sort of a retreat for 2 weeks. So it's not anything, no concerts, but we're just going to get the orchestra back in a place where we can just be together and play and involve possibly, physicality also. We might bring in some people to do maybe exercise, stretching, things like that, but just get everybody kind of in a place where we can be together and play with no stress as far as like trying to prepare for a concert. Let's just do that together. And then over the 2 weeks, then slowly start to kind of make that outward facing to bring the community in. It's just sort of kill two birds or many birds with one stone in a way, trying to bring back the orchestra to the community, trying to say, hey, we're back, but at the same time, give an opportunity for us to just like get our groove back over 2 weeks, and that's physically and artistically.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. But before I forget about it, I want to actually go back to what you said about communicating to patrons, which is, we're focusing mostly on musicians and internal decision making, but stop me if I'm wrong, it sounds like in your thought process on all of this, one of the key elements is communicating something to patrons artistically. If that's accurate, what is it that you're thinking about to actually communicate to them?
Well, we're doing whatever we can to just to bring them into the fold, to bring people into the fold as far as, we canceled our season this year. People bought tickets for it. So we, at the very least, we owe them just communication, regular, this is what we're planning. This is what we're doing. This is what we're thinking about for next year. Because we want people to know that we're going to fulfill these things. We're going to fulfill what they paid for this season. But I also think it's important because you build excitement and you build empathy, you build all of these things, community within the patron base. And so whenever we can, we try to just inform our patrons. So we just did actually this week, we just did a virtual town hall with several of our subscribers over Zoom. It was myself and the CEO. We brought in the concertmaster to perform a little bit for them. And it was literally we're just going to chat and we're going to tell you where we are right now. No BS. This is what it is. So everybody understands what we're thinking, where we're going. And this idea, for example, the 2 week, retreat-ish type thing was something that we did mention to our patrons that this is what we wanted to do. And obviously, the beginning of that doesn't really involve our patrons even because it's really sort of a closed door thing for us. But still, we felt it was important that they understood where we were thinking and that, the musicians are having to figure out how to come back, and this is what we're thinking about to do that.
Well, let me add some positive pushback on that, because the thought just came to me. I mean, obviously you're in Phoenix. Phoenix is also kind of the home of Major League Baseball training camp, and this idea is not entirely different from that concept.
Correct.
And one of the things that they encourage at least fans to do is they sell tickets to be able to watch them come out and practice and get back into shape for the regular season. Has anyone made that connection there?
That's exactly how I presented it to them. That's literally how I opened up. I said, just like spring training, this is what we need to get our team back on track. So the first week is going to be just us, but the second week will be more outward facing. We don't know how that's going to work yet, but that's the idea, is that we want to bring the community in so they can see us doing this. So that was exactly very astute. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, here I am thinking I'm all smug coming up with this idea. No, okay, no, fine. All right. You're already there. You beat me.
Sorry.
Can I just tag on to what?
Please, yes.
Communication. I think one thing we know about this industry, about the orchestral industry, is that people don't really know what happens behind the scenes. How much or about anything in orchestras, you know, like, and so this COVID to me has been a time where communicating with patrons, one, is really important to why we're not playing, but two, to make people realize what do we do, what happens behind the scenes, right? Why can't we just go back into playing performances with 100 people on
Yeah.
stage,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And some orchestras are doing that, and some are not. But I'm really mindful of that because we take a lot of backstage production photos, and
Oh.
my team always is taking, you know, like set photos and all these things. And because I think right now people have no idea the amount of time and planning it goes into one concert, right? Safely, and distance. I mean, the surveys in Richmond, sometimes people are like, why are there not 100 people on stage? They ask us this, even though we've played concerts with 28 people on stage all year, because the average person doesn't understand that, you know, even in COVID, the distancing rules apply. These things apply. You know, we have to safely do this. So it's very interesting, I think, when we communicate that to patrons, they realize, oh, wait, there's a science to this. There's an art to this. There's a plan to this. You
Yeah.
know, all kinds of things.
Correct.
Well, there's a cost to this too, which you've
Right.
both now touched on the thing that I think is from that perspective, Jen. Communicating to the patrons, one of the needs that needs to be communicated to them is this is not standard operating procedure, which means all this stuff takes more money to put into place. All the health and safety issues. You know, Tito, if you guys are going to end up going back 2 weeks in kind of a spring camp or a spring training sort of camp idea, you know, that's still, you know, not just labor costs, but all the production costs that go into that.
Correct.
Without something that is an earned income ticket revenue generating
That's right.
thing that the orchestra can actually put on. And so that has to be sold to somebody who's going to foot that bill.
That's
because
exactly
the
right.
money does not magically grow on trees.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's the challenge, but that's also the motivation behind it. I mean, it's if we come to it with a clear need. I mean, this isn't like, you know, we're just doing this for whatever. This is there's a need for this, there's a reason for this, and especially when you put it in a way that people can understand, like spring training, for example. I mean, that's something everybody can really get behind, especially in Phoenix, because it's such a big deal here. Yes, that you build that excitement. I mean, and people are yearning for it. I mean, they're yearning to come to the hall. They're yearning to be a part of a community. And we also have a lot of, you know, older patrons, and just Phoenix in general. We have a lot of assisted living facilities, a lot of care facilities, and a lot of those folks do come to our concerts historically. They're very a big part of our patron base. And so, you know, communicating to them not only that we're doing it safely, that we're thinking about them, that we're thinking about ways to engage them in the coming year has been of utmost importance, because it does build that trust so that they can keep patronizing us.
I will say, Drew, also that there are certain people that, I know we're not talking politics, but that don't think, you know, the country was supposed to shut down.
Absolutely.
And so they're willing to provide to get us back going, right? Orchestras back going, because they want, you know, in a safe way. But they, like Tito said, they want orchestras to start back up. They want their cultural experience.
Yeah.
So I actually think in some places there are, you know, people ready to sign those checks to have a 2-week residency.
Get us back.
Keep calling it, retreat. Sorry, to get us back. You know, if it gets people back sooner.
Well, and that's stakeholder buy-in. And,
Yeah,
you know, there's stakeholder buy-in begins with your board of directors. You know, if they don't get behind the idea, nothing's going to happen anyway. If they get behind the idea, then you have to move out to your artistic stakeholders and then to your patron stakeholders and large donor stakeholders. And I like how we're kind of hitting each of those pieces of the puzzle here as well, too. Jen, on your end, Tito was talking about the involvement that they have with the musicians on their side. Being a regional orchestra, that's that hybrid core and per service model, what kind of involvement do you folks have with musician buy-in that takes both of those player groups into consideration?
Well, we have our artistic, actually I will say the orchestra committee and the artistic advisory committee have per service and core musicians on them. So I think they have designated numbers probably in their bylaws or something. So there's always representatives of both, but I don't like to think of them as either or. I like to think of them as the orchestra. You know, I think when you separate people like that, it causes other issues, right? So I mean, I keep an open ear to everybody, you know, And I'm mindful of per service musicians who may not be playing for a long time. That said, one of the reasons there are per service musicians in the orchestra is most of them had some other career, right? Or do have some other career. And they play in a certain amount of services, right? So their approach already to the per service side of the orchestra is different, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, we have some members who are full-time music education professionals. We have now someone who is a retired judge, but she was an active judge for a long time. Just all kinds of things. I think we have someone in the orchestra who's a banker. So they've always approached it a little differently anyways. So.
Well, let me move this in now to another direction of expectation, which what put this idea in my head was something that I remembered at the onset of when COVID got really bad, and groups went from just canceling a few weeks to a month to making longer term decisions. And at that point in time, there was a group, which shall not be named, but is a larger budget, nearly 52-week orchestra, that put out a notice that said they were shutting down their entire season, just like right out of the gate. Nope, we're not doing anything, no virtual stuff, nah. And the board chair in that organization included a statement along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, that mentioned even though they were shutting down for an extended period of time, he was sure the musicians would be able to come back at a moment's notice to resume the same performances audiences were used to, which is a really big promise to make, actually. If you think that, from his perspective, that if you don't put something in place that has a cost structure that has to be underwritten and bought into, that you just don't grab the musicians, give them even a month's advance notice and throw them in and do, Mahler with, maybe something from Harry Potter as an overture and every incredible big, heavy artistic impact to cover all of your bases out of the gate. That may not be the best thing you really want to do in the long run.
I know what orchestra you're talking about. I won't say what it was, but I think at that time when that was said is because they were I think the musicians at that point were very ready to come back. Like they didn't want the cancellation, right? So I think it comes from a premise of we didn't want to do this. We have to do this. But everybody wants to get back playing. I know what orchestra that was, but Oregon was the first orchestra to cancel their entire season for reasons that are very similar to some of these other orchestras that, endowment issues and some other things. And I know what the conversations that were being had in Oregon and this orchestra that you're talking about and things like that from the musicians. And everybody kind of just thought, well, this isn't going to last that long. And like, we're ready to come back. I don't know if anyone at that time was thinking about jumping, what the repercussions would be of just jumping back into like a Mahler or something like that.
Right. But I will say though that it does. I mean, for me, I agree. I think I would imagine that the motivation behind it was more innocuous than it seems. But I do think though that it does show a little bit of a disconnect. Yeah. With what the implications of that are, it's not like that. I mean, there is an element of and again the moment, for example, when I mentioned to my board the reasoning for example this 2-week retreat, and I started using that analogy of spring training or whatever, and it clearly made sense. I mean, like, well, of course, you haven't done it physically, then you need to, but it is something that sometimes needs to be reminded, of. That's why sometimes musicians feel very their voices are not being heard sometimes when the decision makers or the people with the power will say things like that, for example. But I do think that in that context, because it was so early on in the thing, that I think everybody was just hoping that this was going to last a month and that we were going to be right back in the thing, not a year and a half later.
Right. I mean, I remember this time last year, what was it, March 12th or 13th, and I remember that Trump said, "Oh, what did you do?" He was like, "I'm closing down the country." And I remember thinking, he can't do that. I had a trip to the Netherlands like a week later. He can't do that. He can't do that. And then in reflection, I'm like, well, everyone did it, and it was a good thing that they did it, right? Like it's like, but it seemed so crazy last year that anybody would shut our borders, right, for this. So
Yeah.
I think there were so many emotions back then. But I had a quick question.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Please.
So when you come back for your 2-week retreat, or go for your 2-week retreat, are you guys having sectionals?
We may. I mean, I haven't filled out what that first week is going to look like, but that might be a thing actually. That we do some full orchestra, some sectionals. We haven't fleshed it out yet, but that's the idea. None of it will be, at least certainly in the first week, will be outward facing yet. It will all be just for our own internal thing, and that actually will be part of the dialogue with the artistic committee, with the musicians. What do you want? What do you think is beneficial? I don't want to be just the one making those decisions, because that's not prudent. But I think that will be on the table for sure.
Well, I'll throw a second question as a follow-up on that, because you guys are both in organizations that have this similar sort of construct, which is you don't own and operate your own venue. So, Tito, where are you guys going to do this? Are you renting halls, time and space for this, or is that out of the budgetary picture?
No, that's we're that the venue is it's that. I mean, also just even aesthetically, for just kind of the way we want to do this, our hall doesn't make sense, or a hall really doesn't make sense for this. It has to be a different kind of venue. So a venue that's conducive to just like being in a beautiful place that like has outdoor space, that has a place where we can just kind of live for a couple weeks. So we're working on that. We have a few in mind, and we're in talks with a lot of venues, but yes, this will be a separate rental, a separate cost. There's going to be cost involved in this, but thankfully my board, my CEO, they're like all in. In fact, this is something that my CEO even came to me on her own initially with the same idea. I mean, I've wanted to do this idea of a retreat even before COVID. I thought it would be really nice to get everybody together, even just to read and get ourselves, back on track, even if it's just a service or two that we didn't use for the week's stuff. Because I think this, for us, for our orchestra, like similar, where the summer is really off for a lot of the musicians, I think it is nice to get everybody back and just kind of figure that out. But this was something that just very organically came from a lot of our important stakeholders, from my CEO. And we're like, no, we need to do this. It's a really big priority for us to do it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And Jen, let's circle back to Richmond a little bit too. Since you guys have been playing less frequently, but at least consistently, are there plans on the books now to have any kind of preparation to gear back up to, pre-COVID artistic operation level?
Yes. Let me just put it this way. So we're going to start in September with a plan of our regular season schedule. 8 masterworks, that's what we call them. Our pop season, our standard season. But what we're going to do, and this was really music director led, with Valentina Pileggi, she knew that she was very concerned about, musician health and building back the orchestra. So we are going to start with, I think I planned it that it's core orchestra only, but we're adding sectionals. That's why I asked Tito about sectionals. So we're going to have at least, the first rehearsal is always going to be at least an hour or something of strings and an hour or something of winds. And she's going to work with them. And then the second rehearsal will be a full reading or some sort of, we'll be working on the schedule and stuff. But we're very mindful, but we've added 2 rehearsals per week additional. So we didn't really make it any smaller. In fact, we added, services, but it was a way to really get people playing together for a longer period of time. And so that they can, like Tito was talking about, listen and get comfortable with each other again and try to build back the sound. And we're in a unique position because our music director was hired during COVID. She was hired a year ago, and so she's never worked with the full orchestra outside of COVID. So she's going to be meeting people for the first time and listening, right? And listening to the orchestra for the first time, and the whole full orchestra, I should say. That said, and we're anticipating a smaller fall. So September, October, November, December, we're building back numbers each month, basically. So we're pretty much, I think, 30-something players for the first concert. October might have a little bit more, But January, that's, fingers crossed, full orchestra.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we're in Phoenix. We're I think we're trying to achieve a similar thing, but the way we're doing it is that we're thinking about just actually shorter concerts. We're going to actually come off the
Oh,
gate with just
interesting.
65 to 80-minute concerts with no intermission. So this way we'll have the full rehearsal schedule, but obviously those rehearsals then, because it's less repertoire, less minutes of music, we'll be able to maximize a little bit more those rehearsals. And so we could do sectionals, for example, and it would actually work out, rehearsal wise and service wise for us.
Was the thought there also because that for context touches on what to me is always a bit of a positive pet peeve thing with the field, in that it's very difficult to get stakeholder buy-in on cutting down the traditional concert length. And if you're coming out of the gate doing the one thing that a lot of groups see as kind of a third rail problem to try to implement, are there plans to actually truly analyze that on every conceivable level, from marketing performance to revenue generation, to see if it's more of a long-term, financially viable, reasonable direction to look at to replace, traditional concert length series?
Yes. Very much so. No, I mean, it is in some ways it's strategic. In some ways it's also just because it's public perception of COVID. Especially if for our constituency, we have quite an old constituency, because it's a lot of people who live in assisted living, very fancy assisted living, but they do. And so, and a lot of the buses that come in, I mean, it's very regular for us, and a lot of our donors and patrons come from that demographic. And so, public perception is very, and we actually addressed this very, very candidly at that town hall that I mentioned that we had this year, this week rather. Even in those words, the public perception and the safety, and we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. Everyone is trusts us that we're thinking about them. And so so that's why actually the idea of a shorter concert isn't something we don't anticipate that to have much pushback, because I think people are just excited to find a way for us to be with them. We're also thinking about even how, if there are still folks who are still uncomfortable coming to the hall, how do we use then the streaming and the digital in a more targeted way to actually send our concerts to some of these places that where folks might still be a little bit hesitant to come back. So I think we're definitely thinking of it very holistically and thinking of it very strategically. And then yes, as it goes on, we're definitely going to be analyzing what it means for us and what it means for our patrons, and whether or not this actually just makes sense as something that we continue.
Promise me now, at least on camera, so everyone can hear you, is that you'll come back at the end of all of this with at least maybe one or two members from staff who are doing this analysis and actually talk about what the findings are, regardless what they discover.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it, and I'm sure my CEO would be happy to do it.
Good. Yeah, I think it'd be great as a topic.
I totally just put her on the spot, and she's probably gonna hate me, but it's okay.
Surprise! Yeah. Well, Jen, how about you guys? Are you doing similar ideas with out of the gate with necessarily not just smaller orchestra, but shorter concert length too?
No, we're actually going back to our regular concert. We are already now we play 3 Masterworks concerts. So Fridays are 90 minutes, no intermission. Saturdays are full, and Sundays are full with intermission. And I find that the people who want to go to the Fridays, and the Saturday and Sunday. I mean, it's really not much different, honestly. I think there are issues with both. I'll just say that. I mean, the Friday no intermission is really great. You get out in 90 minutes and things like that. But like, there's a lot of other issues from production standpoint. Moves, solos with piano moves, especially in COVID, all these, there's just added things, and it takes away from, I think it takes away from time of music, right? So I have to reduce a lot of minutes for those kind of things. And I don't know if that's necessarily worth it. I mean, I'd rather probably just have the intermission back. And then there's other things. I mean, I think some people don't feel comfortable to the restrooms, right? So intermissions, do we really need it? We shortened our intermissions, I will say that. We no longer have a 20, we have a 15-minute right now. But
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Was that COVID related or?
COVID related, 100%. we found that in our first couple of performances this year that people actually weren't using the restrooms. So we didn't need 20 minutes. It was just, and they couldn't go anywhere. We asked them to stand by their seats. So, or sit in their seats, not to only use the restroom if you need it. So it was just like silent in the hall. It was uncomfortably silent. So because of also the distance, we're at capacity 250. We're sold out tonight, by the way.
Good deal.
Yeah, great. Capacity 250, so it can be really, really quiet in an 1800 seat hall if no one's really talking. So.
You got to throw somebody up on stage and just get a conversation going.
Yeah, just to start, do something. I know. No, what's interesting also is that with all of this, I think one thing that I'm always trying to think of silver linings, and even tell people, like, yes, this has been a tough year, but there are silver linings, and I think one of them is not only the communication, I think, that has improved between not only the organization and the patrons, but also the organization internally. That has been something that I think people have had to just be more flexible and be willing to give more of the benefit of the doubt on both sides of the equation. And I think that in itself also is with our patrons as well. I think our patrons are much more understanding. It's like, yes, we are going to try some things to see how this works and how it's going to work in a post-COVID as we're trying to come back. And I think people are really understanding, at least that's the feedback that we're getting, is that we see what you're doing. We're grateful that you're thinking about it, that you're communicating with us, but, and we'll see if some of these things work. We'll see if it makes sense, as I know, Jen, you've had to do in Richmond, coming back to the to give concerts. It's a lot of experimentation. I mean, very educated guesses, of course, a lot of studying and data driven things, but in the end, you don't know until you do it, and you figure out what it is. And I think our patrons are definitely in general, I have a feeling that it's just people are a little bit more understanding with that idea.
I think, I mean, for me, I learned through this experience that I actually think that we've done a lot in this industry to get patrons very used to the same thing. And I do think they've been very understanding and flexible. But I think, I mean, what I've really realized is how important the programming is to them. Like, literally, like, in this time when you can't say exactly what the program's going to be because you just don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is. I'm amazed that people are like, are we still going to play Bolero? Are you still going to play like Beethoven 9? No, it's COVID. I don't know what we're going to play, but we're going to play something great, but it's amazing kind of how, I don't know. I'm really interested in this patron side. Well, it's not part of my job, like to dig real deep into it as much as, marketing and patron communications is, but I'm really fascinated by kind of what we've not done to patrons, but kind of how we handle it, like in general in the industry. People are really, so it's just interesting. Sorry,
and I think that's a fabulous rabbit hole question, though, too, which is, yes, we could have 2 or 3 more shows just on that topic alone, and the lessons to learn from this. And matter of fact, I'll probably just steal that idea and bring you back and do another one of these for it, because I think that is an excellent angle that branches off of all of this. And I think this also puts us in a good place, kind of to do a little bit of a wrap up here. For folks watching this right now, this is going to be a little bit of a different show in that this is actually the first of what's going to be a couple of episodes that we're going to do on this very same topic, but bring in different individuals. We're going to have a show that will just have musicians to get their perspective on all of this. And then another show that's just going to be non-artistic executive decision makers in an organization, the people who have to take all of these different viewpoints and actually make the decisions behind them, to get a more broader, comprehensive view. But now, for both of our guests here, knowing that and that perspective, are there any final thoughts you want to add to the conversation?
For me, I've been thinking about a lot. This was actually pre-COVID, about having a wellness committee, starting one for organizational wellness, and creating activities and things. A lot of times, I was the organizer in Oregon for those kind of activities, and so
define wellness really quick. I sorry to interject, but do you mean like internally, or wellness programs for patrons, or
wellness programs for the staff and musicians and board.
Gotcha.
So I used to plan like runs. We used to in Oregon, like I'd get a team together, musicians and staff, and we'd do runs. We'd have holiday parties, all these things. Actually, I did that at CIM too. That's like, I like doing those kind of things. So I wanted to do that here, but have musician members and staff members as well to help create some things. But I say that because I'm actually really considering having some sort of yoga, some sort of mindfulness person come in. I don't know if that's once a month. I don't know if that's during double days. I haven't thought about it yet exactly how, but I would like to see that. I was going to do that anyways pre-COVID, but I think right now it's really important. I think not only the we're talking about, the physical aspects of getting back into shape, but I actually think also about the mindfulness aspects and performance anxiety. I think that's going to be a really interesting part of it as well, getting people mentally back in shape to play at a high level. Especially with the virtual world. I know in conversations I've had, luckily, I mean, we do virtual here in Richmond. And I think our musicians, the first week were a little shy, but then, they're used to it. But now you see, soloists who aren't necessarily comfortable, with this virtual world. You see, we're going to have musicians who haven't been on camera, back, and those kind of things. And I think Tito and I were having this conversation recently about recording. Musicians are so used to the recording aspect, and then it's not the live virtual aspect, and so you can't just take it again. It's just going to be out there on the interwebs. That's what it is, right? So getting people used to that and making sure that they can play comfortably and at their best and not develop things that, could hurt their playing.
Consider hiring an improv specialist.
Oh, for sure.
They do and I've seen them in action, and my wife has actually done some work with students along these lines of dealing with that live environment that is real time, that yes, it's not recorded, you can cut and do punch sessions and the rest of it, and being able to actually work in a positive way off of that energy regardless what it's going to be. There's another topic we could probably do. But Tito, final thoughts on your end.
Yeah, I think this is all. Well, it's funny, just for context, because Jen and I basically see each other every Sunday. We have our. In the beginning of all of this COVID, I ended up starting this regular Sunday Zoom with some of my conductor colleagues, and it's been varying attendance over the summer. At one point, we had like 15 people on the thing, because we're all not doing anything. We were especially over the summer, we were all not working, and so, or the few of us that were working, we were all like, oh my God, what is it like to conduct? Make music, but Jen is an honorary conductor, so she's been on all these calls with us, and it's been really great.
My way in.
You forced your way.
But it's been wonderful because we very rarely, I mean, do we get a chance like with conductor colleagues to really have just literally week to week conversations about all of this kinds of stuff, and we're having conversations like this every week, just about what's going on, what are you doing, what matters to you, what are you thinking right now, and to hear my colleagues talk about it is really, really important, because it certainly gives us all different perspectives. But one of the things that I think that is going to have to start changing in orchestras, and some are, I think with the idea of creating or really thinking about the job satisfaction, because I believe that that's something that musicians, we take for granted, and even the musicians take for granted. It's just like the system that we buy into, where you're a finished product when you take the audition. That's what the expectation is, and then you just churn out concerts after concerts after concerts, and there's no thought to wellness, there's no thought to career development, there's no thought to anything really. It's just you just do the job and that's it. You can't even move up in the company. You're just in your chair, and that's all it is. So I think this is something that, and that's of course a whole can of worms that we can talk about in so many different ways. But I think that's something that, this is bringing to light, is like, okay, so yeah, maybe we need to think about the physical and mental health of the musicians, and maybe it's the employer's job to be responsible for some of that, and to provide opportunities to to deal with that. And I think that's something that is going to be on the minds of a lot of people this coming year, especially those who haven't thought about it before.
I love all of those words. That is a near and dear topic to my heart. Yes, job satisfaction. And I could have a very long ranty show just on that as well, too. So, yeah, maybe I'll bring you back for that one, too, and we'll have a good time with that. But, yes, It is ultimately the employer's perspective on all of this. We'll probably put, on my end, the executive decision makers, at the end of this process, because that's where this process ultimately ends, is they're the ones that have to take all of these opinions. And, right here, it's sounding very much like, preaching to our own little choir of everyone's on the same page and has the same ideas and, thinks the same good things. Although I wasn't aware you were already talking about this like every week before the show. It added to a nice, seamless feel. Thank you for that. But, there are going to be bumps along the road, Again, not just that board chair's press statement, but board members in particular that I talk with, this is not, that perception is not unusual, let's say. It is decidedly more representative. And within every organizational culture, the amount they communicate, how they communicate is very different. And so while there might be a really good, strong amount of connection happening even between conductors, Tito, that's great that you're doing this weekly program to get these ideas on the minds of as many music directors as possible. And musicians having these conversations, it doesn't always filter through. And hopefully these types of public conversations will start to get people moving in that direction to make sure that people just don't inadvertently make mistakes for the best intentions. So we'll see where things go from there. So thank you both very much for taking the time out of your Saturday afternoon to come on with this. All right, everybody. So thank you for your time as well. And we will be back with this topic again, talking to some musicians. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Doing my little happy dance.
Yes, exactly. Keep smiling until the director says cut.
That's
right.